Hello and welcome to the Hope at Work podcast. With me today is Kevin Monroe. Now I have to tell you, I honestly thought I was the most passionate person on the planet about the topic of hope. And then I met Kevin and I realized I was wrong. So Kevin, maybe let's start with a little bit about your background and how you got interested in the pro-social topics of both hope and gratitude.
Wow. Well, first off, thanks for having me here. And Marcus, what an incredibly kind way to introduce me. So I am passionate about this. And maybe the backstory helps illuminate why I'm so passionate about this. It's not anything I ever sought to become. And it all started on a particularly dark day that I happen to remember, April 17th, 2018. That morning, and I describe myself as a perpetual optimist, but that morning, and I'm usually up between 4:30, 5:15 a.m. without an alarm clock. But that morning, I woke up several times, looked over at the clock, and it was just like, I'm not feeling it today. I realized quickly that I was at a point of despair. There was some discouragement that had set in. These lists that I call the deadly Ds, right? Despair, discouragement, disappointment. And if they are left unattended, they lead to full-blown depression. And I knew I was at the precipice that day. And I knew that if I didn't do something, I could be spiraling to a dark place for who knows how long. So, I finally got up about 7:45 that morning, peeled myself out of bed, came into my office, sat down with my journal because I have this morning rhythm of things I do. And I sat down, but there was just no energy, no excitement, no joy to do any of them. But a mentor of mine had invited me to add prayer to my morning routine. Mm-hmm. And there was nothing to pray that day. And I ended up just praying, Spirit, you're the source of creativity. Ignite, spark creativity in me. And I'm laying on the floor in that liminal space, partially awake, partially asleep. 45 minutes later, I sit up, Marcus, with an idea. And that idea was to launch a 90-day journey that we called the Extraordinary Experiment. For people that feel like me. And when you look in the mirror, what you see is an ordinary guy or gal, right? An ordinary person, but you have within you this desire to live an extraordinary life. How do you do it? And so we set out on a 13-week journey, 90 days. Each week had a challenge, and sandwiched right in the middle of the 13 weeks of challenges, we called one the Gratitude Challenge. And that week was the first time in my life that I'd pondered and even asked and attempted to answer the question, are being thankful and being grateful the same thing?
Right.
And I immediately knew there was a difference. I wasn't sure what that difference was at that moment. Anyway, that started me on a quest in 2018, and I just started adding gratitude to my life daily and started including gratitude into every meeting, event I hosted. I do a lot of speaking, facilitation, so I'd bring it in, introduce it into corporate settings and ask people to reflect on something good that was going on in their team. And a year later, June 2019, I had this idea of hosting our first event. And we did an email-based challenge that we called the Gratitude Challenge. We did it for 10 days, just helping people discover, could being grateful make a difference in your life? Well, Marcus, that challenge blew up, and I ended up hosting 22 sessions of that 10-day challenge. We had over 2,800 people from 73 countries of the world join us. Yeah. And along the way, people started referring to me as the gratitude guy.
I love that.
Yeah. And so it was just this organic thing, but it started out of this place of darkness, this place of personal desperation, of looking to make a shift in my life. And then, I was asked to do a webinar on gratitude. And Tracy Fenton of World Blue asked me, would you do a webinar for our leadership cohort? And I'm like, of course you will. Yeah, I will. You're a friend of mine. What do you want me to do it on? And she goes, duh, gratitude. And it was that moment, Marcus, when I realized I'd become the gratitude guy, because she couldn't imagine me doing a session on anything else. But I said to her, no, I want to do something, but a webinar is not the right thing. You don't need someone to show up as a talking head and lecture for 45 minutes about gratitude. And she said, well, what will you do? I said, I don't know. Let me think about it. And so a few days later, I had this idea of hosting a gratitude encounter, and we developed that. And as part of that, Marcus, that's when we began to measure hope.
Okay, so that's when hope became introduced to the picture.
Yeah.
And how did that happen? Like, how do you see the relationship between gratitude and hope?
So a couple of years before then, I was at an event and I heard a speaker, and her closing slide said, hope is cultivated in the soil of gratitude. Mm. And that just kind of lodged a thought in the back of my mind that just stayed there. Wonder, curious. Hope is cultivated in the soil of gratitude. So I remember when we started, January of 2021, in a gratitude encounter. So let me fill in a gap there. I do a gratitude encounter. We're supposed to do this in March of 2020. And, the world changed in March of 2020 with COVID.
Sure did.
So we didn't get to do this gratitude encounter until August of that year. And we did it virtually. And then in September, I had this idea that I wanted to do this monthly and just kind of see what it would take if we invested into growing gratitude in more interactive ways through this gratitude encounter. And the whole idea of a gratitude encounter, rather than lecturing about gratitude, is to create an environment where people explore, express, and experience gratitude.
I like that.
Right? So this interactive thing. Well, then in January of 2021, and I remember because it was January 5th, 2021, I had become very enamored with this hope idea. And we started measuring hope at every event. And at the beginning of an event, we ask people, reflect back on the past week. And, it's a subjective measurement, just level of hope. If 0 is running on empty and 10 is having a full tank, what's your level of hope over the last 7 days? And then what's your level of hope now in this moment? And Marcus, I don't remember why I had the presence of mind to ask it two ways at the beginning, but I know what I was thinking. When people have already made a decision to join an event that's called a gratitude encounter, and they come to a room and they're greeted by smiling faces, they receive a warm welcome, and even in just the opening and the introduction, they're starting to feel good. And with 4 exceptions, every time I've asked the question, what's your level of hope now? The in the moment number is always higher than the preceding 7 days. Right. And I think it's largely because people have made that decision. They have made a commitment. They've come into a space. And then 45 minutes later, 50 minutes later, towards the end, we measure it again. And we ask, what's your level of hope now? And what happens between? People are in interactive rounds of small group conversations around a theme, around a topic. They get to connect quickly and deeply with other people. They share real life experiences of hope and gratitude. And then when we measure again, it's usually a 20 to 25% boost of hope in the course of 1 hour.
Wow.
That's mind-blowing to me, Marcus. I mean, it's literally mind-blowing.
That's remarkable. And I imagine that in large part, what you've learned over time, and you alluded to it very early on when the request was made for you to do a webinar, And I completely agree with you. We are past the stage of having a talking head speak at us versus the encounter. I love that term and the use of alliteration of saying it's about exploration and expression and experience. That helps me remember. But I imagine that plays a huge role when you have these encounters because it's interactive and it's relational. Am I right?
It is. It is. Okay. So when we launched this very first one in August, I remember the moment it was over, my friend Tracy sent me a message. She's like, "Oh my gosh, Kevin, that was amazing because it hit on all the dots, right? Or, it checked every box. There was interaction. I've used this tool Mentimeter for 9 years now. Mentimeter, we ask a question or we put up a poll and people get to respond and you get to see real-time responses and you get to see how other people are responding to the same question that you're asking, right? So that creates this feeling of connection and it creates a sense of belonging where people, oh gosh, I'm not the only one who's felt this way. Look at this. In this room, 52% of people here today feel this same way. So that creates this sense. And then they've gone into discussion groups and, had this interaction in very small groups, with a question that's guiding the discussion. And then we come back and we use Mentimeter to share what were the big themes you heard, right? So there are all these things that are happening, but Tracy's just like, "Oh my gosh, Kevin, you just hit on all the boxes and you had somebody share a success story from their journey." And that's when it led us to start doing this consistently. Wonder what would happen, right? Because knowing, okay, so if you go to a lecture, if you listen to a talking head, at the end of the time, if you're still paying attention, if you, in the Zoom world, people are multitasking. They're doing so many other things. So that's part of it. How do we keep people involved? When you do that, people have felt that connection. The second public session I hosted, October of 2020, I remember somebody writing this as the response because we always collect response at the end of every session. We arrived as strangers, left as friends.
Ooh, I like that.
Boom, boom. And earlier this year, a new friend of mine, Ken, who's the VP in a finance organization, he started attending our gratitude encounters. And I was in a meeting with him the day after he had attended. And for some reason that Tuesday, we kept people in the same discussion groups between round 1 and round 2 when they went back, rather than dividing them up again. And somebody new had joined late, so they weren't part of their group in the first round. They were part in the second round. And when they started, they're like, "Oh gosh, so you all know each other. You're all friends?" And they're like, "No, we just met in the earlier round of discussion." And Ken was so overwhelmed that was the observation of an observer, right? That they had formed that kind of connection in an 8-minute round of conversation.
Wow, that's remarkable. And also remarkable that finance people appreciate gratitude as well. I'm glad to hear that.
So Marcus, I'll go a little deeper to your hope question.
Please.
So we had been tracking hope, researching hope, tracking the data on hope since 2021. But gratitude had always been what we were leading with, what we were leading the conversations with. But as 2025, my words, as it unfolded, and then quickly I realized it wasn't just unfolding, it was unraveling, right? For so many people, life, work, it's hard to make sense of things going on in the world. There's so much change that's happened so quickly, so many disruptions. I remember it happened on January 1st, wee hours of the morning. There were 2 terroristic attacks, in the U.S., one in New Orleans, followed by one in Las Vegas a couple of hours later. And I don't know if people know this, but they both happened to have rented cars from Turo, the company. And on January 4th, I've never been a Turo customer, but I had signed up on their platform. I get an email from their CEO, and I saved that email. And on the final line, he was talking about how all of the things they had done to dive into, explore what happened and how could they have prevented this from happening. And they use all of the high measures of security. He said this could have happened with any car rental company in America. We use it as high or higher standards. It just happened to happen with us. And his last line on the fourth day of the new year, 2025 is off to a terrible start. I had such high hopes. And that was on January 4th. I tucked that away. And then there were apocalyptic fires in California. I never heard apocalyptic used so many times in the news media, you know. Then there were plane crashes and then, you know, all of these changes that were happening and economic shifts or meltdowns. And people were in despair. And as we went into February, then in February 11th, for some reason I remember the date, Gallup put out a global study. And the study said the number one thing followers need and want from their leaders now, you know the answer, hope.
Yep.
Hope. And it was 56% of responses were around hope. The second response, 38%. I mean, that was a distant second, was trust. And so I'm noticing this like, wow, right? Leaders need to be dialing into hope. Leaders need to be leading with hope, giving people hope because people are desperate. People are lonely. People are in despair. So that's when we started leaning even more into hope. So our work now, it's hope-focused, gratitude-fueled. Gratitude's not disappeared. We're just focusing on the hope aspect. And then by focusing on hope, I have this wonderful opportunity to meet this guy, Marcus Mossberger, one day. And then it's like, wow, look at what you're doing in the corporate world to grow hope and to recognize the power of hope at work.
Well, I am glad that you made your way to becoming a hope dealer. So welcome.
Thank you.
And I love that you read that article in Gallup. I read the same article, and it's funny, Kevin, I actually immediately following that, I reached out to Gallup and I said, hey, I know you do these wonderful, you know, surveys and you've got these employment engagement indexes that you do. Have you ever thought of doing a hope index? And I actually got a guy to call me back and had this really interesting conversation about it. Of course, these things aren't free, so I'm still trying to work with them to figure out how could we make something like that happen. But you mentioned early on the importance of measuring hope.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about that and how you go about doing it. So you've referenced in your content Rick Snyder multiple times. I had the pleasure of actually studying under Dr. Snyder at the University of Kansas.
Wow.
A long time ago. And he, you know, I think you know that his focus and when it came to defining hope was you've got goals, like we got something to look forward to and work toward. You've got pathways. So I feel like I've got options and different avenues to achieve those goals. And then you've got agency. So I've got control, I've got power, I've got choices. When you look at those three elements, do you measure all of them? Do you focus on one of them more than others? Do you focus on other elements that help you identify whether people are hopeful? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So the other or another amazing connection that happened as we started leading with hope as our lead conversation starter, talking about hope, writing about hope. I have a gentleman reach out to me who is just wrapping up his PhD studies, who is studying hope and quantifying hope and developing scales to measure hope in a far more complex way. And it's really funny, Marcus. Okay, so he reaches out to me on LinkedIn, you know, and that's how we met. LinkedIn is such a powerful medium when people really use it well. And you use it to connect with people, invite people into conversation, start relationships. So this gentleman reaches out to me and we're in a conversation, and he said, Kevin, he tells me all of his background. He said, now let me tell you why we're talking today. I'm like, okay, I'm really interested. He said, I have this idea. He had been a math teacher and he now teaches math adjunct at a university level. And he said, it hit me that there is a mathematical, progression at which hope grows. And we want to study that. We've started studying that. Okay. And he said, so I go to Google to see if anyone else is talking about this. And Marcus, 2 weeks before, we had launched a video series that we called Hope Multipliers. Because, the other part, when you kind of, one of the things that we realize, there are a lot of things that deplete or diminish hope, right? And when people are in low hope, in whatever those metrics are, that's when despair sets in, and that's when discouragement sets in. And it's really important. So, I had landed on the topic of agency before I'd gotten into C.R. Snyder's work. And when I did, I was like, oh my gosh, because I realized how important agency is in life. Yeah. Right. And so I'm going to add one thing. When I read Snyder's work, I love it. We use it all the time, but I modify it so people aren't confusing what he says about goals with Jim Collins' BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals.
Great point.
Because sometimes, right, if the goal is too big, that big, hairy, audacious goal, it can be paralyzing.
Yes.
It can be demotivating because you don't see a pathway from here to there. So I say it's important to have goals, but these are goals that they're a stretch goal, but they're an achievable goal, right? So it activates motivation and, it creates desire. It doesn't result in paralysis. You're like, oh gosh, I don't know what to do, because there are people that get there. But the point of agency, that something you can do that changes your situation. So one of the other things on this journey, I said earlier, I think of myself as a perpetual optimist. But I've come to understand hope is different than optimism.
It is, isn't it?
It is, right? So optimism can be defined as this generalized belief that everything's going to be okay.
Yes.
And if, as a leader, you're in a difficult situation in your organization now, and the only thing you articulate or communicate is this generalized belief that, hey, it's going to be okay. It's really bad now. It's never been this bad before, but hey, chin up. We're going to get through it.
The Use Case Podcast is where technology vendors get to talk about themselves. And it's a wonderful place for vendors, investors, and practitioners to listen to the story of the solution, the features, the benefits, the attributes, etc. And we get to know the CEO or founder during the call, and we also get to know the tech. So subscribe to the Use Case Podcast.
Well, that doesn't build hope, right? Because it eliminates agency. So hope is the belief. What distinguishes hope from optimism? Hope is the specific belief that there's something I can do, something we can do that changes our situation.
That's right, Kevin. The definition that I use for hope, and I'm always looking at it in the context of the corporate landscape. I'm looking at where we spend the majority of our lives as human beings, right, in the workplace. And I define it as the active belief in a better future.
Oh, I love that.
Active being the key, right? You have a role to play. You have an action to take. It is not something you just sit by the side and you think, oh, maybe things will get better, to your point. And so agency becomes the prominent element of that. I love that you latched onto that. I did too. And you know what I think, Kevin? I think the next generation which we tend to make generalizations about,
Right.
usually in a negative light, especially the older I get. And I think, my goodness, boy, are they different. But from a positive perspective, that next generation fully expects, and I think at one point will demand more agency. They want choices. They want flexibility. They want autonomy. They want to work from wherever, whenever, with whomever. They don't want to be constrained. And I think agency is going to become really important.
I agree. So I remember the first time I did a session that I talked about agency was for a group in the UK, government leaders in the UK. And I had been asked to lead a gratitude encounter. And for some reason, we made it around 3 A's. And we started talking about agency plus action, right? So to me, this is the second key ingredient or element. When you have agency, agency is kind of irrelevant until you take action.
That's right.
Right? So agency plus action leads to an amazing result in your life. That was the third A that I was introducing that day, right? Agency plus action, because we all theoretically have agency.
That's right. But did you do anything with it?
Exactly. Did you take action to enter and to do something to make that better, brighter future a reality? So, right. It's, you and I are so aligned on this. It's moving from passivity to activity.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
There's something I can do.
Kevin, let me throw another A at you.
Okay. I love our sense of alliteration, our shared appreciation.
It helps me remember things. So how do you think artificial intelligence is impacting people's point of view about the world of work in particular? Do you think that new technology has the potential to make us more hopeful about the world of work, or less hopeful, or somewhere in between that spectrum? What's your point of view?
Yeah, well, my point of view is yes. Either or both, right? I mean, somewhere in between, because it's how you as a leader, how you as a company, how you as an organization choose to deploy artificial intelligence, right? Yeah. Are you deploying artificial intelligence to replace people or to liberate people? And so I had a conversation, and I know I introduced you to Finland's leading futurist, and he had invited me on this conversation of the future of work. And will the future of work be more or less human? And my response is yes. It will be both. It's kind of how people put it to work, how people view it, and how leaders choose to deploy it. Now, I hope it leads to this better, brighter future where we are liberating people from menial tasks that machines can do and do exceptionally well. But we're liberating people to create greater connections with customers, with clients, with patients in healthcare. And we're liberating people for creative tasks and freeing them to, let's use another word, to activate their imagination for what could be better. What could we do differently that makes the workplace more human, that allows more connection between people? And so I think it's both. Both are possible. So I remember in that conversation, because I started thinking, right, some people have a very dystopian view of AI, and some people have a very utopian view of AI. And those are kind of poles of the spectrum, right? You can either have a very dystopian view or a very utopian view. And so then if we blend that, lay over that, how do we do this to make the future of work more human? Then it invites us, it challenges us to use our imaginations to how we put AI to work to make sure we're not dehumanizing the workplace, and we're not eliminating our need for humans, but we are elevating the role the humans we employ get to do in our work. So
I think you're right. I think it has the potential to go both ways. There was an article just recently about IBM, and IBM announced that they were removing hundreds of HR people and replacing them with agentic AI. Those headlines, the way that they're written, are meant to be clickbait, like, oh my goodness, dystopian point of view, we're all going to lose our jobs. I think the reality of what's happening, Kevin, is that those HR people, to use your term, are being liberated from the transactional, administrative, menial, manual tasks and being freed up to focus on work that only human beings can do. And in the world of HR, it has the name human in it. It is meant to be very personal. But you know what's interesting that I find? I talk to a lot of HR people because of the role that I'm in, working for a technology company that provides HR software. And what's funny, Kevin, is when I talk to some of these folks, and they tend to be the more tenured folks, I'll put it that way.
Okay.
That have been doing these administrative transactional tasks their whole career. When I go to them and say, you don't have to do that anymore, they go, well, I want to. Well, don't take this away from me. And it's not really so much that they want to do it. It's that it's familiar. They're good at it. It's comfortable. And when you say, I'm going to have you do something very different, there's fear that sets in as a result of that. And it's just fear of the unknown. Fear, am I going to be good at this? You want me to be creative? Kevin, I haven't been creative in a long time. I don't know if that muscle still exists in my mind. So even though we're actually showing people a potentially better future, some are still resistant to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So Marcus, this week, I had an idea, and it comes out of the hope science, hope research, and it was trying to identify and put some labels on what are those situations that deplete hope, right? What are the things that take hope away from people? And then how do we begin addressing those? So, and I launched a survey this week trying to get people to see which of these they most identify with. And let me give you 7 labels, and maybe you'll have something to add. But here were the labels we started with. And the one that got the most votes so far is the relentless giver. So many people identify because they're always helping others. A lot of HR. I have a lot of friends in the HR world as well, right?
Okay.
But they may not realize that they're running on empty, that they are exhausting their reserves. Because
nursing's another profession that's the same, right?
Oh, yeah. Nursing. Absolutely. Absolutely. Then there's the change weary warrior. And I was talking with a friend this morning. We know of people in companies that are having major reorgs twice a year.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And then, so in the change weary warrior, just how many times can you say we're launching something new and everything's going to be better? And the people that are charged with leading that still believe that, right? I mean, it's kind of like, so that's the change weary warrior.
That's a good one, Kevin. I've talked to people that are like, I'm on my 5th boss in the last 2 years.
Exactly.
And that's common.
Exactly. It is common. It is. And I've experienced this because I've done some work with some, Fortune 10 companies, Fortune 50 companies, and we do a project. And then the moment the project's done, they've launched a reorg and they're like, hey, we'd love to do some more work, but we've got to get through this reorg first. And then a few months go by and we do something, and then they're into another reorg. And I'm like, how many reorgs can somebody stand? Then there's the hollow high achiever. And I came up with this label because of a conversation I had with a new friend in the last 2 weeks. Her story crystallized this for me. She was in a profession where everything was going well, according to the metrics. She's making more money than she had ever made. And she stepped away and just pushed the pause button a moment, and she asked one question. Will I be happy with the person I become if I do this for the next 10 years?
Mm.
And she knew she wouldn't be, because that high achievement was hollow. It wasn't filled with purpose and meaning. And she's made a shift and gone into an entrepreneurial pursuit. And I love it. But it was all started because I just realized how hollow this high achievement was for me. Another one that we all know, the overwhelmed observer is what we've called it. Maybe there's a better label for that. But we do some 21-day hope journeys. And we're doing these monthly now. And in the very first one, I remember Sarah, one weekend, says, I've stopped doom scrolling.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's just so much coming at people, and so much of that is negative, and it's discouraging, and right? So just overwhelmed. Then there's the connected yet lonely person. So many people on LinkedIn, they're hyper connected and they're interacting with people all day long, but they never have a meaningful conversation. Right? It's all surface and shallow. And at some point they just go, gosh, I'm always in and around, but I'm never with people. Then there's the worn out striver. And I've seen a lot of people identifying with this. I know people, people that have been in the job market longer than they ever thought they would be on the job market right now. I've got a friend, 10 months now. It's 10 months.
Yeah. Very common.
And he has been a finalist for 3 or 4 dream jobs. And the best one, they hired a new president, and the president just said, hey, we're just going to put this search on hold. We may want to do something different. And he had gone through 7 interviews to get there. And so it's just worn out that no matter how hard you try, you just can't catch a break or can't make any progress. And then the final one we see, and I'm bringing all these up because, hey, these are in your workforce too, right? People that are in this, that are experiencing this disillusioned dreamer, right? That dreamed of accomplishing something, whatever that is, personal, professional, and it hasn't happened yet. And I have a friend years ago, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, wrote a book, Afraid to Hope. And it's about these disillusioned dreamers, right? Because they've been let down so many times. They're at a point now they're just afraid to hope. So in the workplace, this can look like physical exhaustion, right? People aren't showing up. They may not be able to give their best. And as a leader, if you just think, well, this is physical exhaustion, do you need a mental health day? Do you need to talk to EAP? Those are kind of the answers. But what if we recognize, going back to Snyder, what if we recognize this isn't physical exhaustion? This is hope depletion. And we need to address it differently. Yeah. And what's really amazing to me, Marcus, is how quickly people can restore hope. What a big difference it makes.
Yeah, I never really thought of it from that perspective, Kevin. I really appreciate you bringing that those 7 categories and this concept that there are things that can add to hope, but you can't just focus on those. You have to also acknowledge the things that deplete hope.
Yeah.
And it needs to be a dual activity. So listen, I could talk to you for days. There's no question of that. But let me wrap up with one final question. You've obviously had a chance to be immersed in this area for several years now. For those folks that are listening, what advice would you give them to improve their hope levels? Should they focus more on adding versus the depletion? Now that you've done some additional research, and I'm doing some as well on workplacehope.com, you can go out there and fill out that assessment. You mentioned the relentless giver might be kind of the number one category, but just in a brief kind of summary, what quick advice would you give?
Quick advice. I mean, this comes from the hope science, right? And I love that there is a science of hope, right? There are people that just kind of think, oh, that's a natural personality tendency that some people have. No, there's a science to this, and you can actually embark on hope building activities. So here is one that we're watching makes a significant difference, and you can start right now. As a matter of fact, if you're listening to this and you're wondering, what can I do? Hey, what if you just stop right now and you look back over this day, whatever time of day it is for you when you're listening, and you challenge yourself to find 3 bright spots of the day, right? So this whole idea of looking for bright spots, what we're watching happen to people when they set that intention in the morning, right? That I'm looking for bright spots today, that then it activates. I'm sure there's a scientific term. I call it your noticer, right? But it sets you on, you're just watching for, and you go, and I've loved how some people have said this. They go through the day and they're wondering, is this going to be one of my bright spots that I share later today? And that creates savoring of a moment, right? So not only are they looking for bright spots, and Marcus, I'm pretty sure you would agree with me on this, that even on a bad day, a dark day, there's still bright spots in the day.
Absolutely.
Right? And so, gosh, what if you look for the bright spots? Or I guess it was, Mr. Rogers talked about look for the helpers, right? That kind of thing. Look for the helpers, look for the bright spots. Even on a bad day, you can find a bright spot, 2 or 3, and that will activate hope. And then when you spot them, express gratitude for them. So the way we break this down from a gratitude perspective, simple triangle: pause, notice, express. Pause, just take a pause. And then look back, look around, look within, look up, right? So if you're really having a bad day, get outside in nature and just look up. Right? Look at the sky, look at the trees, listen to the birds. Those are bright spots that can activate a shift in your day. And if you make this a daily practice, right, now you're building hope reserves. And you can do this as a team. Right? What if your next team meeting, you start and you just, hey, before we get into the agenda, all right, or before we tackle the problems we're here to tackle today, hey, what bright spot have you noticed in our work this week? What bright spot have you seen in a client interaction? Or what's a bright spot a client has accomplished using our tools? Can we celebrate that? Right? And all of a sudden, that's just creating this hope reservoir.
I love that. And it's funny that it comes back to where we started, which is hope is cultivated in the soil of gratitude. So well said, Kevin. Thank you so much for taking the time to join. I really hope this is not the last time you are on this podcast.
Oh, me too, Marcus.
Yeah, there's definitely so much more we can do to collaborate, but thank you for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for the invitation and an amazing conversation.
You bet.